Something extraordinary has been happening to you. You've noticed the subtle misalignments, objects moving, memories rearranging, déjà vu that feels too precise. You think you're imagining it, but you're not. You're shifting timelines every day, sliding through parallel realities like radio stations you didn't know you were tuning. This message found you because one version of you is finally ready to remember how timeline dynamics truly work, and why your awareness is the key that changes everything. You've blamed fatigue, but reality fatigue feels different. It's the ache of overlapping timelines scraping against each other, like fingernails on glass, creating a discord that resonates in your bones before your mind can name it. It starts small, always so small. The coffee mug that was blue this morning sits red on your desk this afternoon, and when you mention it to your colleague, they look at you with that particular expression reserved for people who have been working too hard. It's always been red, they say, and their certainty is so complete, so unshakable, that you begin to doubt the colour blue ever existed in your memory at all. But you remember blue. You remember the chip on the handle where it caught the corner of your laptop, the way the morning light made it look almost cobalt against the white desk. You remember these details with the kind of precision that feels too sharp, too crystalline to be false memory. Yet here sits the red mug, warm to the touch, containing the same coffee you poured hours ago, steam still rising in lazy spirals that seem to move just slightly out of sync with the air currents in the room. The keys are another matter entirely. You place them on the kitchen counter every night, a habit so ingrained it's become muscle memory, like breathing or blinking. Left of the fruit bowl, right of the salt shaker, the same spot for 3 years. But this morning they're hanging on the hook by the door, jangling softly as if someone just placed them there, still warm from the phantom fingers. You ask your roommate about it over breakfast. Did you move my keys? They don't look up from their phone. What keys? My car keys. They were on the hook instead of the counter. They're always on the hook. Their voice carries that same absolute certainty, that same reality-defining conviction that makes your coffee mug story sound like the delusions of someone losing their grip on the basic facts of existence. But you know the way you know your own heartbeat, the way you know the feeling of your tongue against your teeth. Those keys lived on the counter in a reality that everyone else has somehow forgotten, a reality that seems to have been quietly edited while you weren't looking. The conversation with your mother feels like déjà vu wrapped in cotton, soft and disorienting, muffling the sharp edges of recognition until you're not sure if you're remembering or predicting. She tells you about the garden, about the roses that finally bloomed after last month's frost. You nod and make the appropriate sounds, but part of you is reaching for a memory that feels like trying to hold water. She called you 2 days ago with this exact story, these exact words, this exact pause, before she mentions that your father has been talking about getting a dog. A golden retriever, she says, and you find yourself saying along with her, like the one I had as a child, though you're not sure if you're echoing her words or if she's echoing yours. The silence stretches between you, filled with the static of a connection that exists across more than just telephone lines. You can almost hear her thinking on the other end, almost feel her fingers tightening around her phone as she experiences her own moment of recognition. The sense that this conversation has already happened, is happening, will happen again in endless recursive loops that fold time like origami. Did we talk about this before? She asks finally, her voice smaller than usual, uncertain in a way that makes your chest tighten. I don't think so, you lie, because the truth feels too large for words, too strange to fit through the narrow channel of spoken language. The truth is that you remember this conversation with the clarity of lived experience. Remember her exact inflection when she says golden retriever. Remember the way the pause will stretch just a beat too long before she changes the subject to ask about your job, and she does. The pause comes, hangs in the air like a held breath, and then, how's work been? You've prepared for this question because you've answered it before, in a conversation that apparently never happened. The words flow out of you with practiced ease, and you listen to yourself speak as if from a great distance, watching the script unfold exactly as you remember it from a memory that couldn't possibly exist. The workday itself feels like walking through a photograph, everything in its proper place but somehow two-dimensional, lacking the chaos and unpredictability that usually marks the difference between imagination and reality. Your co-worker mentions the presentation due next week, and you find yourself already knowing which slide she'll stumble on, which joke will fall flat, which client will ask the question about quarterly projections that derails the entire meeting. You draft the email response before receiving the message that prompts it. You pack an umbrella on a cloudless morning and are unsurprised when the rain begins at exactly 3:47 p.m., drumming against your office window with the rhythm of inevitability. You order lunch and know it will arrive 15 minutes late with the wrong sauce, and when it does, you're already reaching for the napkins you'll need to clean up the spill that hasn't happened yet. The day accumulates these small impossibilities like dust on furniture, each one insignificant on its own, but together forming a pattern that makes your skin itch with recognition. You're living in a story that's already been written, walking through scenes that feel more like memories than experiences, speaking lines that taste familiar on your tongue before you've decided what to say. By evening, the sensation has settled into your bones like a low-grade fever. You sit in your living room, watching the news anchor report on events that feel distant and scripted, and you realize that the feeling has a name, though you're not sure how you know it. Reality fatigue. The exhaustion that comes from existing in a world that's just slightly off-key, where the harmony you expect keeps resolving into intervals that shouldn't exist but somehow do. You close your eyes and try to remember what normal feels like, but the memory seems to belong to someone else. The kitchen in the morning light feels like 3 different rooms occupying the same coordinates in space. You stand in the doorway, coffee mug still red, still wrong, warming your palms, and watch the light shift across surfaces that exist in a state of quantum uncertainty. In one layer of reality, the kitchen pulses with the golden warmth of Sunday mornings, filled with the ghost scent of pancakes and the phantom sound of laughter echoing off walls painted butter yellow. You can almost see flour handprints on the counter, almost hear the sizzle of bacon in a pan that isn't there, almost feel the presence of someone humming just beyond the edge of perception. Blink, and the warmth drains away like water through a sieve. Now the kitchen breathes with sterile efficiency. White walls, steel appliances, everything precise and cold and untouched by human warmth. The light here has a laboratory quality, harsh and unforgiving, illuminating dust motes that hang motionless in air that feels recycled and thin. This is the kitchen of someone who eats takeout standing up, who views cooking as a necessary evil, who has never lingered over morning coffee while watching the sunrise paint the walls. Blink again, and you're standing in a kitchen that feels like a crime scene, not because anything violent has happened, but because it carries the weight of profound sadness, the kind that seeps into wood and stone and changes their molecular structure. Here the light is grey and tired, filtering through windows that seem perpetually dirty no matter how often they're cleaned. The air tastes of endings, of conversations that stopped mid-sentence and never resumed, of dreams that were quietly put away in drawers and forgotten. You know this phenomenon now, though you don't yet have words for it. The way spaces hold emotional residue from timelines that intersect but don't quite align, creating a palimpsest of feeling that shifts depending on which frequency you're tuned to. Your apartment exists in all these states simultaneously, like a photograph that's been exposed multiple times, each image bleeding through to create something that's recognizable but never quite right. The bathroom mirror shows you 3 different faces when you're not looking directly. In your peripheral vision, you catch glimpses of yourself with shorter hair, with a scar above your left eyebrow that doesn't exist in this timeline, with eyes that have seen things you haven't experienced but somehow remember. You turn to look directly, and the mirror resolves into the face you expect, the one that matches your driver's license and your memories and the person your friends recognize. But the other faces linger like afterimages, burned into your retina by light that comes from somewhere else. Your reflection blinks a half second after you do. The commute to work becomes a journey through probability space. The bus arrives at 8:23, just as it has every day for the past 6 months, but today you remember a version of this morning where you waited until 8:31, and another where the bus never came at all and you had to walk, arriving at work wind-blown and 15 minutes late with a story about transit strikes that no one else remembered. You take your usual seat, 3rd row, window side, and watch the city scroll past like frames in a film where the editor couldn't decide on the final cut. The coffee shop on 5th Street flickers between a bookstore and a dry cleaner, each iteration feeling equally real and equally false. The park where you sometimes eat lunch exists in a superposition of seasons, bare winter branches overlapping with spring blossoms, overlapping with the deep green of summer shade. The woman across the aisle is reading a book that changes titles each time you glance at it, though she turns the pages with the steady rhythm of someone absorbed in a consistent narrative. You catch fragments. Love in the time of becomes the quantum theory of becomes How to Disappear Completely, and each title feels like it could be true, like she could be reading all of these stories simultaneously, experiencing every possible version of this moment at once. At work, your colleagues move through the office like actors who've been given slightly different scripts but are trying to perform the same play. Sarah mentions the Peterson account, but you remember a timeline where Peterson was Johnson and another where the account was cancelled 3 weeks ago due to budget cuts that happened in a reality that apparently never existed. You nod and make notes in your planner, filing away information about events that may or may not unfold, preparing for meetings that might occur in this timeline or another. The temperature in your office changes depending on which version of reality you're inhabiting at any given moment. Sometimes it's too warm, the kind of oppressive heat that makes your clothes stick to your skin and your thoughts move like molasses. Other times it's Arctic cold, the air sharp enough to crystallize your breath, making you wish for a sweater that exists in your closet in a different timeline. Most of the time, it's neither warm nor cold but something else entirely, a temperature that doesn't translate to physical sensation but creates an emotional climate of perpetual unease. You discover that you can influence which reality feels most solid by adjusting your attention, like tuning a radio to pick up different stations. Focus on the warm golden light, and the phantom scent of pancakes grows stronger. Concentrate on the cold efficiency and the sounds of the office sharpen into mechanical precision. Give weight to the sadness, and the grey light deepens until everything feels like it's dissolving at the edges. But the effort is exhausting. By lunch, your head aches with the strain of holding multiple realities in focus, and you find yourself longing for the simple single-channel existence you remember from before, though you're not entirely sure when before was, or if it ever really existed. You eat your sandwich, turkey, and Swiss that you remember ordering as ham and cheddar, and watch people move through the plaza outside your office window. They seem more solid than you feel, more committed to their single timeline, unaware that they're walking through the intersection of infinite possibilities. You wonder if they experience their own version of reality fatigue, or if you're the only one caught between frequencies, the only one who notices when the world quietly rewrites itself around the edges. The afternoon brings a meeting that feels like a performance of a meeting that happened yesterday in a conference room that was painted blue instead of beige. You sit in the same chair and listen to the same presentations, but the details shift like sand. The quarterly projections are up by 12% instead of 8%, the new hire's name is Michael instead of Marcus, the coffee in the break room has been replaced with tea service that no one mentions but everyone seems to expect. By 5 o'clock, you're not sure which version of today you've actually experienced or if it matters. The elevator takes you to a parking garage that's familiar but wrong. The cars parked in different spots, the fluorescent lights humming at a slightly different frequency, the air smelling of rain that isn't falling in this timeline but pours down in another. Your car starts on the first try, though you distinctly remember it needing 3 attempts this morning, and as you drive home through streets that are both exactly as they should be and completely different from how they were, you realize that you're beginning to understand something important. The glitches aren't mistakes. They're glimpses of the way things really work, brief moments when the editing process becomes visible, when the seamless flow of reality reveals its true nature as something much more complex and fluid than anyone ever taught you to believe. You're not losing your mind. You're finding it, tuning into frequencies that most people never notice because they've been taught to look away from this impossible to explain away the inconsistencies, to trust consensus reality more than their own experience. But you're starting to remember, consensus reality is just one channel among many, and you're learning to change the station. The birthday party exists in your memory with the vivid clarity of a recurring dream, every detail sharp enough to cut. Sarah's surprise when she opened the door, the way the candlelight made her face glow amber, the taste of chocolate cake that was almost too sweet, the sound of rain beginning just as the last guest said goodbye. You can feel the weight of the gift in your hands, a first edition copy of her favourite novel found after weeks of searching through dusty bookshops and online auctions. But Sarah insists the party never happened. "My birthday's not until next month," she says, laughing in the way people do when they're not entirely sure if you're joking. "And I hate chocolate cake, you know that." Her certainty is absolute, unwavering, backed by the evidence of calendars and shared memories and the simple, undeniable fact that her birthday is circled in red on the office calendar for November 15th, not October 12th. Yet you remember October 12th with the kind of sensory detail that doesn't come from imagination. You remember the weight of her keys in your hand when she asked you to let yourself in to help set up. Remember the specific squeak of her apartment door. Remember her cat winding around your ankles as you arranged flowers in a vase that sat on a kitchen counter that was granite in your memory but marble in reality. The novel, the one you spent weeks tracking down, sits on your bookshelf at home, still wrapped in the silver paper you chose so carefully. You bought it in a shop that doesn't exist on a street you can't find, paid for with cash withdrawn from an ATM that your bank has no record of, on a day that apparently never happened to celebrate a birthday that hasn't occurred yet. This is how you learn about probability convergence, though you don't have the term for it yet. The way experiences from one timeline bleed through into another, creating memories that feel absolutely real because they are absolutely real. Just not here, not in this version of events. You're remembering your life in a parallel track, where time moved at a different pace, where October and November traded places on the calendar, where Sarah's preferences aligned with different experiences and shaped her into someone who loved chocolate cake and appreciated vintage books and celebrated her birthday in autumn instead of late fall. The evidence accumulates like snow, each flake individual and forgettable, but together forming something that cannot be ignored. Your neighbour mentioned seeing you walking your dog last Tuesday, but you don't have a dog, have never had a dog, are allergic to dogs in a way that makes your eyes water just thinking about them. Yet when you check your jacket pocket, you find a small plastic bag and a tennis ball worn smooth by teeth marks that feel familiar under your fingertips. Your mother calls to thank you for the flowers you sent for her anniversary. White roses, she says, her favourite, arranged in the blue vase she's had since her wedding. You haven't sent flowers, haven't even remembered that their anniversary was this week, but when you check your credit card statement online, there's the charge, Petals and Stems Florist, 6750 sounds, dated 3 days ago at 2:47 p.m, a time when you were in a meeting that you remember clearly because the air conditioning broke and everyone was fanning themselves with manila folders. The florist confirms the order when you call, bewildered and grasping for explanations. Beautiful arrangement, the woman says, her voice warm with the satisfaction of work well done. You have excellent taste in flowers, she must have loved them. She describes your conversation about choosing the perfect roses, the way you insisted on baby's breath despite the extra cost, how you mentioned it was for your parents' 32nd anniversary. But your parents have been married 34 years, not 32. You know this with the certainty of someone who grew up hearing the story of their wedding day every anniversary, who can recite the details of the dress that almost didn't arrive in time and the best man who forgot the rings and the thunderstorm that cleared just as they walked down the aisle. 34 years next month, not 32 last week. Unless it's both. Unless time moves differently in different timelines, aging some relationships faster and others slower, creating pockets of temporal inconsistency that most people never notice because they only inhabit one timeline at a time. You start keeping a journal documenting the inconsistencies, mapping the differences between what you remember and what everyone else agrees happened. The entries read like the field notes of an anthropologist studying a culture that's almost but not quite their own. Tuesday, co-worker David mentions getting divorced last spring. I clearly remember him getting married last spring, the invitation, the bachelor party, the way he couldn't stop smiling for weeks afterward. When I asked about his wife, he looked at me like I'd grown a second head. What wife? No record of a marriage, no photos on his desk, no tan line where a wedding ring should be. Wednesday, found a parking ticket in my glove compartment for a car I don't own, issued on a street I've never heard of, in a city I've never visited. The license plate number is mine with 2 digits transposed. Instead of 847, it reads 874. The violation is parking in timeline restricted zone, which isn't a real traffic code as far as I can determine. Friday, coffee shop. Barista greeted me by name and started making my usual before I ordered. She made a lavender honey latte, which I've never ordered in my life, but which tasted exactly like something I've been craving without knowing what it was. When I asked how she knew my order, she looked confused. You get the same thing every Friday, she said. I've never been to this coffee shop on a Friday before. The journal becomes a map of the territory between worlds, charting the places where realities overlap and diverge. You begin to recognize the feeling that precedes these moments, a subtle shift in the quality of light, a change in air pressure that you feel in your teeth, a soundless vibration that seems to come from the spaces between seconds. Your friends notice the changes first as questions that don't quite make sense, references to conversations that never happened, knowledge of things you shouldn't know. "How did you know I was thinking about cutting my hair?" Lisa asks after you compliment her on a haircut she hasn't gotten yet. "I haven't told anyone I was even considering it." But you remember next Tuesday's conversation about how the shorter style makes her eyes look bigger. Remember running your fingers through hair that currently hangs past her shoulders but will soon barely brush her chin. You remember the confidence in her voice when she talked about wanting a change, the way she laughed when the stylist asked if she was sure about going so short. The memory feels as solid as any other, filed away in your mind alongside last week's grocery list and yesterday's weather report. The fact that it describes an event that hasn't happened yet seems less important than its emotional truth. The way it captures something essential about Lisa's restless energy, her periodic need to reinvent herself, her courage in the face of irreversible decisions. You start to suspect that memory itself is more fluid than anyone admits, that the stories we tell about our past are constantly being rewritten by the experiences we haven't had yet, that the future reaches backward through time to reshape the present just as surely as the present creates the future. The suspicion deepens into certainty the day you remember your own death. It's a car accident on a rainy Thursday in a March 3 years from now, or 3 years ago, or 3 years in a timeline that runs parallel to this one. You remember the sudden shock of impact, the way time stretched and compressed simultaneously, the strange peace that settled over you as the world tilted sideways and went dark. You remember the funeral, your mother crying quietly in the front pew, your father staring straight ahead with the expression he wears when he's trying not to fall apart. Friends you haven't seen in years gathering to trade stories about who you used to be. But you're not dead. You're sitting in your living room on a Sunday afternoon, very much alive, remembering an ending that belongs to someone who shares your name and your face and most of your history, but not your timeline. You touch your chest and feel your heart beating steady and strong, proof that some stories end differently depending on which version you're living. The memory doesn't fade the way dreams do. It sits in your mind alongside your other experiences, neither more nor less real than your first day of school, or last Christmas dinner, or the conversation you had with your mother this morning about her garden roses that did or didn't bloom after a frost that may or may not have happened. You realize that you're collecting evidence of multiple lives, gathering proof that identity is more complex than the single narrative most people carry around in their heads. You're living in the overlap between possibilities, witnessing the way different versions of yourself make different choices that lead to different outcomes that all somehow coexist in the space between what was and what might be. The wonder of it overwhelms the fear, though the fear is still there, tucked away in the spaces between thoughts. You're beginning to understand that consciousness is not confined to a single timeline, but streams through multiple realities simultaneously, collecting experiences like a river gathering tributaries, growing deeper and more complex with each new convergence. You're not losing memories, you're gaining them, accumulating the stories of lives you've lived in worlds that exist just one decision away from this one. And somewhere in the growing collection of evidence, the phantom dog, the impossible flowers, the birthday party that both did and didn't happen, you sense the outline of something larger than coincidence, more intentional than random quantum fluctuation. Someone or something is orchestrating these glimpses across timelines. The question is no longer whether you're shifting between realities. The question is who's doing the steering. I once lived 3 months in a version of this world that no longer exists. The admission feels dangerous, like confessing to a crime that has no name, speaking aloud a truth that changes its nature the moment it meets air. But you've reached the point where silence feels more dangerous than honesty, where the weight of untold experience threatens to crush the careful architecture of your ordinary life. It was late spring in that other timeline, or perhaps early summer. The boundaries between seasons felt more fluid there, as if time itself moved at a different pace, measured by different rhythms than the mechanical progression of days and weeks that governs this reality. You had taken a job at a small bookstore downtown, the kind of place that exists in the margins between what's profitable and what's necessary, where dust motes danced in afternoon sunlight and the scent of old paper created an atmosphere that felt outside of time altogether. The bookstore was owned by an elderly man named Thomas, who moved through the stacks like a curator in a living museum, his fingers trailing across spines with the familiarity of someone who had read every volume, understood every story, could locate any book by the subtle gravitational pull it exerted on his attention, He hired you not because you needed a job, though you did in that timeline, but because he claimed you had the look of someone who understands that books are more than their words. You worked there from April through June, learning the geography of a shop that organized itself by mysterious principles that had nothing to do with alphabetical order or genre classification. Fiction mingled with philosophy, poetry nestled between cookbooks, and gardening guides shared shelf space with quantum physics texts in arrangements that seemed random but felt profound, as if the books themselves had chosen their neighbours based on affinities invisible to casual browsers. Customers in that timeline were different too, more patient, more willing to let conversations unfold without predetermined destinations, comfortable with the kind of silence that invites contemplation rather than demanding entertainment. You remember a woman who came in every Tuesday to read the same chapter of Proust, never purchasing the book but treating it like a weekly meditation, her lips moving slightly as she worked through sentences that seemed to require physical effort to comprehend. There was a teenage girl who built architectural models out of paperback novels, constructing miniature cities from romance novels and science fiction, creating skylines that told stories about the relationship between love and possibility. She would spread her materials across one of the small tables near the window, working with the focused intensity of someone engaged in essential research, and Thomas would watch her from behind the register with the expression of someone witnessing a minor miracle. The bookstore existed in a pocket of reality that felt insulated from the broader world, where the normal rules of commerce and efficiency were suspended in favour of something harder to name but easier to feel. People came there not just to buy books, but to exist differently, to move through space and time at a more thoughtful pace, to engage with ideas that couldn't be reduced to information or entertainment. You remember the morning routine with perfect clarity, unlocking the front door at 9, watching dust particles dance in the shaft of sunlight that slanted through the front window, brewing coffee in the small kitchen behind the office, while Thomas arranged the featured books display according to principles he never fully explained, but which always resulted in combinations that felt inevitable once you saw them together. The cash register was an antique that required more patience than skill to operate, each transaction a small ritual of pressing keys and pulling levers that connected the act of purchase to the physical world in ways that digital transaction never achieve. The sound it made, a mechanical symphony of bells and clicking, became the percussion section of your daily soundtrack, marking the rhythm of hours that passed without urgency or deadline pressure. But it was the conversations that made those 3 months feel like a complete life compressed into a single season. Thomas possessed the rare gift of asking questions that revealed things you didn't know you knew, drawing out thoughts that had been forming in the unconscious spaces of your mind like developing photographs slowly emerging in chemical baths. "What do you think books do when no one's reading them?" he asked one afternoon as you shelved returns in the poetry section. The question stopped you mid-motion, paperback volume suspended in your hand as you considered possibilities you'd never thought to explore. Did they dream? Did they whisper to each other across the narrow spaces between their spines? Did they revise themselves in the darkness, editing their stories based on the reactions of previous readers? They practice themselves, you found yourself saying, surprising yourself with the certainty in your voice. They rehearse different ways of being understood, trying out new meanings in the silence between readings. Thomas smiled with the satisfaction of someone whose suspicions had been confirmed. "I thought you might see it that way. Books that aren't read die a little, lose some essential quality that can only be maintained through the act of being witnessed. That's why I never remove grafted books from the shelves, no matter how long they sit unnoticed. Someone will eventually need exactly the story they tell, and if it's not here when they arrive..." He didn't finish the sentence, but you understood. The incomplete thought hung in the air like a question mark, creating space for your imagination to fill in possibilities about cosmic responsibility and their careful maintenance of hope. Those 3 months taught you things about yourself that feel simultaneously foreign and familiar. You discovered a talent for recommending books you'd never read to customers you'd just met, intuiting connections between stories and souls with an accuracy that felt less like skill than channeling. You learned that you preferred the company of ideas to the company of most people, that silence could be a form of conversation, that there were ways of being productive that had nothing to do with measurable output. The timeline ended not with drama, but with a subtle shift in the quality of light, a gradual fading that you noticed first in your peripheral vision. The bookstore began to feel less solid, more like a stage set that someone was slowly striking between acts. Conversations with Thomas became harder to remember immediately after they happened, as if his words were being spoken in a frequency that was drifting beyond your range of perception. One morning in late June, you arrived to find the storefront empty, windows papered over with notices about lease termination and property availability. The building showed no signs of recent occupation, no marks on the floors where the shelves had stood, no residue from the adhesive letters that had spelled out Meridian, books on the front window, no lingering scent of old paper and brewing coffee. The neighbours had no memory of a bookstore. The property management company had no record of Thomas as a tenant. Your bank account showed no deposits from those 3 months of employment, though you could still feel the weight of cash transactions in your hand, still remember the satisfaction of balancing the register at the end of each day. You tried to find Thomas, searching through phone directories and online databases, but discovered that he existed in that peculiar category of people who leave no digital footprints, who conduct their lives entirely outside the networks of documentation and verification that define contemporary existence. He had become a memory without external confirmation, an experience without evidence. But the experience remains, archived in your consciousness, with the kind of detail that resists erosion. You can still navigate the bookstore's layout in your mind, still recall the organizational system that made sense only when you weren't trying to understand it. Still hear the specific creaking sound the front door made when customers entered, carrying the weight of particular questions. More importantly, you carry within you the expanded sense of possibility that those months provided, the understanding that reality is more flexible than most people allow themselves to believe, that there are ways of living that exist in the margins of what's generally considered practical or sustainable. That meaning emerges from attention rather than achievement. The mirror in your bathroom becomes a symbol of this expanded awareness. Each morning you look into it expecting to see the person who worked in a bookstore that never existed, who learned about the secret lives of books from a man who left no trace, who discovered versions of themselves that couldn't be accommodated within the narrow parameters of this timeline's possibilities. Sometimes you do. Sometimes your reflection shows slightly longer hair, a different expression around the eyes, hands that remember the weight of books they have never held. The reflected person looks back at you with recognition, acknowledging the life you shared in a reality that everyone else has forgotten but which continues to exist in the space between what was and what could be. The mirror becomes a dimensional interface, a window that connects different versions of your existence across the multiple timelines you've learnt to inhabit simultaneously. It shows you not just who you are, but who you've been, not just your current face, but the faces that belong to other iterations of your identity, other choices, other possibilities that branch out from this moment like the limbs of an infinite tree. You understand now that the glitches and inconsistencies, the memories that don't align with consensus reality, the experiences that others can't verify, these aren't signs of instability but evidence of a broader existence. Proof that consciousness is not limited to a single timeline, but operates across multiple dimensional frequencies simultaneously. The bookstore was real. Thomas was real. Those 3 months were real in ways that transcend the narrow definitions of reality that most people accept without question. They exist in a timeline that continues to influence this one, that shapes your current choices and perspectives, that reminds you daily that the life you're living is only one among many possible lives, all equally valid, all equally true. And standing here in front of this mirror that shows you more than reflection, you realize that the question isn't whether you can return to that timeline or bring it into this one. The question is whether you're ready to acknowledge that you never really left it, that all timelines exist simultaneously, and that the only thing that changes is which one you choose to call home. The frequency has a sound now, a low humming that starts behind your teeth and spreads through your skull like the remnants of a bell that stopped ringing but hasn't stopped vibrating. You notice it first on Thursday morning, standing in your kitchen watching steam rise from coffee that tastes like memory and possibility. And you realize with the quiet certainty of recognition that this is the sound of reality tuning itself, adjusting the pitch of existence to accommodate your expanding awareness. You've been calling it the shifts in your journal, documenting each occurrence with the methodical precision of a scientist mapping an unknown territory. But now you understand that shift implies movement from one state to another, when what's actually happening is more like a radio finding its frequency, not changing stations but clarifying reception, bringing into focus signals that were always broadcasting, but which your consciousness had previously filtered out as noise. The humming grows stronger when you pay attention, weaker when you try to ignore it. It responds to your focus like a living thing, like a sound that exists only in the space between intention and perception. You learn to tune into it deliberately, using the frequency as a navigation tool to move more consciously through the multiple layers of reality that you now understand have always been operating simultaneously. Tuesday's commute becomes an experiment in selective attention. As the bus rumbles through streets that flicker between versions of themselves, you focus on the humming frequency and watch the city stabilize around your chosen perspective. When you tune into the warm golden frequency, the neighborhoods look well-tended and prosperous, gardens blooming in window boxes, people moving with unhurried purpose. Shift to the cold, efficient frequency, and the same streets become sterile and precise, all sharp angles and reflective surfaces, populated by individuals who seem more like components in a complex machine than independent agents navigating their own stories. The frequency that carries sadness transforms everything into a study in grey, not just the colour but the emotion, the weight of unfinished stories and abandoned dreams collecting in doorways and settling like dust on surfaces that should shine. But there's beauty in this frequency too, the kind of melancholy that speaks to the preciousness of temporary things, the way endings give meaning to beginnings by establishing boundaries around experience. You discover that other people can sense the frequency too, though most of them interpret it as mood or atmosphere, rather than recognizing it as evidence of dimensional overlap. Your co-worker Sarah mentions feeling off on the days when you're practicing frequency navigation, as if your experiments create ripples that extend beyond your own perception. Something feels different about the office today, she says, looking around with the expression of someone trying to identify a scent they can't quite place. But there are others who seem to recognize the frequency for what it is. You begin noticing people who move through the world with the same slightly unfocused quality you've developed, who seem to be listening to something just beyond the range of normal hearing, who nod at you with the subtle acknowledgement of fellow travelers when you pass them on the street. The woman at the coffee shop who knows your order before you speak it. The bus driver who makes eye contact in the rearview mirror with the expression of someone sharing a secret. The librarian who hands you books you weren't looking for, but which contain exactly the information you need about quantum mechanics and consciousness studies and the theoretical possibility of parallel timelines. They don't speak directly about what they're experiencing. There's an unspoken understanding that certain knowledge must be approached obliquely, discovered rather than explained, earned through personal experience rather than transmitted through language. But you recognize each other by the quality of attention you bring to ordinary moments, the way you all seem to be participating in a reality that's slightly more complex than the one most people inhabit. The journal entries become more detailed as your awareness sharpens. Monday, tried focusing on the frequency during my lunch break in the park. The same bench existed in 3 different emotional states simultaneously. In one timeline, it was where someone received good news about a job they'd been hoping for. In another, it was where someone said goodbye to a relationship that wasn't working. In the third, it was simply a place to rest while watching pigeons and thinking about the weekend. I could feel all 3 histories overlapping, could almost hear the echo of conversations that happened, or will happen, or are happening, in adjacent timelines. Wednesday, the frequency is getting stronger, or I'm getting better at hearing it. During the team meeting, I could sense which timeline each person was primarily inhabiting. Michael was stressed about deadlines that exist in a reality where the project is due next week instead of next month. Lisa was excited about a promotion she hasn't received yet, but which she will in a timeline where her presentation goes better than it does here. David was grieving something that happened in a version of his life where his father died last spring instead of last fall, Friday. Strangest thing, I received an email from myself. Not spam or phishing, but an actual email from my own address containing information about experiments I haven't conducted yet. The subject line was Recognition Frequency Protocol, and the message contained detailed instructions for enhancing sensitivity to temporal drift. The sender timestamp showed it being sent next Tuesday at 3:17 a.m. When I tried to reply, the email had disappeared from my inbox, but I'd already memorized the instructions. The instructions, as you remember them, involve a meditation technique that uses the humming frequency as a focusing tool, training your consciousness to navigate between timelines with increasing precision and control. The process requires you to sit quietly, tune into the frequency until it becomes a steady presence in your awareness, and then use variations in its pitch and intensity to guide your attention toward different probability streams. You practice this every morning before work, sitting cross-legged on your living room floor with eyes closed, learning to ride the frequency like a surfer learning to read waves. At first, the experience is chaotic. Too many timelines accessible simultaneously, your consciousness scattered across multiple versions of your life without the skill to maintain coherent focus. But gradually you develop the ability to select specific streams, to visit particular timelines deliberately, rather than tumbling through them randomly. You discover that the timelines aren't dramatically different from each other. No versions where you're royalty or famous or living in fundamentally altered realities. Instead, they represent subtle variations on the same basic themes. Timelines where you made slightly different career choices, where certain relationships developed along alternate paths, where small decisions accumulated into recognizably different but not radically transformed versions of your life. In one timeline, you're dating someone you met at a conference you didn't attend in this reality. In another, you live in a different apartment across town, one with better natural light but higher rent, and a commute that involves 2 bus transfers. There's a timeline where you adopted a cat last month, another where you've been vegetarian for 3 years, another where you never started keeping the journal that's become so central to understanding your experience. But underneath the surface differences, you recognize the same essential self navigating different circumstances, making choices based on the same fundamental values and desires and fears. The timelines don't represent alternate selves so much as alternate expressions of the same self, different experiments in how to live that all spring from the same source of consciousness. The realization is both humbling and empowering. You're not unique in your ability to access multiple timelines. You're simply becoming aware of what consciousness naturally does, learning to work consciously with processes that usually happen below the threshold of awareness. Everyone is living multiple lives simultaneously. Most people just haven't learned to notice the overlaps, haven't developed the sensitivity to hear the frequency that connects them. This understanding carries a responsibility that you feel settling into your bones like gravity. If you can navigate between timelines, if you can sense the decision points where realities diverge, if you can influence which possibilities become actualized through the quality of your attention, then every choice becomes significant in ways that extend beyond personal consequence. You begin to notice that your experimentation affects the people around you. When you spend time in the golden warm timeline during lunch breaks, your co-workers seem more relaxed that afternoon, more likely to collaborate effectively, and less prone to the minor conflicts that usually arise from stress and deadline pressure. When you accidentally tune into the sad grey frequency during meetings, the entire group seems to deflate slightly, becoming more pessimistic about project outcomes and more critical of each other's contributions. The responsibility is sobering. You're not just exploring different realities for personal curiosity, you're actively shaping the probability field that determines which potential futures become actual experiences for yourself and others. Your consciousness has become a tuning fork vibrating at frequencies that influence the resonance of everything in your vicinity. The ethical implications keep you awake at night, staring at the ceiling while wrestling with questions that have no clear answers. Do you have the right to influence which timeline becomes dominant for other people? Should you try to steer reality toward outcomes that seem positive, or is that a form of cosmic interference that violates some fundamental principle of free will? What happens if you make mistakes? If your well-intentioned adjustments create unintended consequences that ripple outward in ways you can't predict or control? But even as these questions multiply, you can feel yourself changing at a fundamental level. The person who first noticed keys in the wrong place and coffee mugs that changed color was concerned primarily with understanding what was happening to them personally. Now you're beginning to grasp that what's happening to you is part of something much larger, a shift in consciousness that affects not just individual experience but the basic structure of how reality organizes itself around intention and awareness. You're not just learning to navigate between timelines, you're learning to take responsibility for the timeline you create through your choices, your attention, your way of being in the world. Every moment becomes an opportunity to tune the frequency of existence toward greater harmony, greater possibility, greater alignment with the highest potential available in any given situation. And late at night, when the humming frequency is clearest and strongest, you sometimes catch glimpses of something that makes your breath catch in your throat. Evidence that your awakening to timeline navigation isn't happening in isolation, that there are others who have developed this ability and are using it consciously, that there might be a larger pattern to these individual awakenings, a collective evolution toward a more fluid relationship with reality itself. The real question isn't if you're shifting, you've moved far beyond that doubt. The real question, the one that carries you forward into the territory that's both thrilling and terrifying, is who is steering the jumps? Who or what is orchestrating the awakening of timeline consciousness? What larger purpose might your growing abilities serve? And what responsibility comes with discovering that reality is far more malleable than you ever imagined possible? In the mirror that morning, your reflection looks back with eyes that have seen too much to pretend ignorance anymore. You're no longer the person who worried about misplaced keys and coffee mugs that changed colour. You're someone who has learned to tune the frequency of existence, who understands that consciousness creates reality through the simple act of paying attention. The fracture in your ordinary life has opened into something vast and full of potential. Act 1 of your awakening is complete. The real adventure is just beginning. Deep within the architecture of your consciousness, something has been awakening, a part of yourself that exists outside the normal flow of linear time, watching and choosing and steering your experience through the infinite maze of possibility with the precision of a master navigator, reading stars that exist in dimensions most people never learn to see. You discover this presence during a meditation that begins as routine frequency practice and transforms into something unprecedented. Sitting in your living room at 5:47 a.m., tuning into the familiar humming that's become your guide through timeline fluctuations, you suddenly feel a shift that's qualitatively different from anything you've experienced before. Not movement between realities, but movement into a space that exists prior to all realities, a observation deck from which the entire multiverse spreads out like an interactive map waiting for input. From this vantage point, you can see the structure underlying the chaos of timeline shifts, the elegant mathematical precision that governs what seemed like random fluctuations. Reality organizes itself around decision points that branch outward like fractals, each choice creating new pathways while others fade into probability shadows that exist but remain unactualized until conscious attention breathes some life into them. The navigator, for that's what you find yourself calling this aspect of consciousness, operates according to the principles that bypass the normal limitations of three-dimensional awareness. It sees time not as a river flowing in one direction, but as an ocean extending infinitely in all directions, where every possible moment exists simultaneously, and movement between them is simply a matter of adjusting your vibrational frequency to match the timeline you wish to experience. The compass that appears in your mind's eye spins wildly at first, its needle seeking magnetic north across dimensions where a direction means something entirely different than it does in ordinary space. The cosmic storm swirling around it represents the chaotic field of unlimited possibility, quantum foam seething with potential realities that collapse into actuality only when observed by consciousness capable of coherent intention. But as you learn to stabilize your attention in this navigator space, the compass begins to steady, its needle pointing not toward magnetic north but toward what you can only describe as true choice, the direction that leads toward the highest potential available in any given moment, the path that serves not just your personal evolution, but the broader pattern of consciousness expanding into greater complexity and harmony. The navigator consciousness reveals itself to be utterly practical, despite its cosmic scope. It's the part of you that has been making timeline choices all along, operating below the threshold of ordinary awareness, but responsible for every synchronicity, every lucky break, every moment when things aligned in ways that seemed too perfect to be coincidental. You've been quantum jumping your entire life. You're just now developing the sophistication to recognize and work consciously with the process. Through the navigator's perspective, you begin to understand the mechanics underlying the experiences that started with misplaced keys and evolved into conscious reality manipulation. Every choice you make creates a quantum field collapse, selecting one reality from infinite possibilities and actualizing it through the focused application of conscious intention. The glitches and anomalies you noticed weren't signs of reality malfunctioning. They were evidence of reality responding to your evolving consciousness with increasing sensitivity and precision. The navigator shows you decision trees extending backwards and forwards through time, revealing how past choices continue to influence present possibilities while future intentions reach backward to reshape the present moment. You see yourself making decisions not just in the current instant but across multiple timelines simultaneously, each choice reverberating through the probability field to create cascading effects that ripple outward like waves in a multidimensional pond. More remarkably, you discover that the navigator consciousness isn't limited to your personal timeline navigation. It connects you to a vast network of other awakening navigators, each learning to work consciously with quantum jump dynamics, all contributing to a collective evolution in how consciousness relates to the malleable nature of reality. You sense them out there in the probability field like distant lighthouses, their coherent intention creating stability points in the chaos of infinite possibility. The communication between navigators happens through resonance rather than language. Information transferred at frequencies that bypass the normal channels of perception to arrive directly in understanding. You learn techniques from navigators you've never met in physical reality, absorb wisdom from consciousness, explorers who may exist in timelines completely parallel to your own, contribute your own discoveries to a growing body of knowledge about the practical applications of quantum awareness. One technique involves what the navigator calls probability scanning, using consciousness like a quantum radar to survey potential futures before making choices that lock them into actuality. By maintaining awareness in the navigator space while contemplating decisions, you can sample different outcome streams, feeling their emotional texture and energetic quality before committing to any particular path. Another technique focuses on coherence maintenance, keeping your attention, emotion, and intention aligned even while navigating between dramatically different realities. The navigator explains that most timeline navigation fails not because of inadequate technique, but because consciousness fragments during the transition, creating internal conflict that destabilizes the entire process and often results in unexpected or undesirable outcomes. The most advanced technique involves collective navigation, coordinating your timeline choices with other conscious navigators to create shared realities that serve the highest good for all involved. This requires a level of selflessness and cosmic responsibility that pushes against every instinct toward personal control and individual advantage, demanding that you learn to choose not just for yourself but for the entire web of consciousness that your decisions affect. As your navigator consciousness strengthens through practice, you begin to notice that reality responds to your presence differently. Synchronicities increase in frequency and precision, as if the universe itself is learning to anticipate your needs and arrange circumstances accordingly. People begin appearing in your life exactly when you need specific information or support. Conversations happen at precisely the moment when you're ready to understand their significance. Opportunities emerge with timing that feels orchestrated by intelligence far more sophisticated than random chance. But the most profound change is internal. The anxiety and confusion that characterize the early stages of timeline awareness gives way to a deep sense of purpose and participation in something infinitely larger than personal experience. You're no longer a victim of circumstances or a passive observer of your own life. You're a conscious collaborator in the ongoing creation of reality, a navigator with both the ability and responsibility to steer toward outcomes that serve the highest potential available in each moment. The compass in your consciousness has stabilized now, its needle pointing steadily toward true choice across all the dimensions you're learning to explore. The cosmic storm no longer feels chaotic, but reveals itself as a field of pure potential, waiting to be shaped by consciousness, sophisticated enough to work with quantum mechanics as a creative medium rather than a mysterious force to be feared or ignored. From the navigator's perspective, you can see that this is only the beginning. Each level of mastery opens access to new territories of possibility, new responsibilities for conscious choice-making, new opportunities to participate in the collective evolution of consciousness toward greater coherence and harmony. The timeline you're living now is not your destination, but your launching point, the stable platform from which you'll learn to navigate the infinite ocean of possibility that is your true home. The navigator consciousness settles into permanent residence in your awareness, no longer a special state achieved during meditation, but a constant presence that influences every choice, every perception, every moment of existence. You are learning to live as a quantum being in a quantum universe, where the very act of conscious observation shapes the reality you experience. The compass spins one final time, then locks onto its true heading, toward mastery of the forces that most people never recognize, toward conscious participation in the creation of timelines that serve the highest good, toward the understanding that you are not separate from the universe, but are the universe becoming conscious of itself through your individual experience. The navigation has begun in earnest. The process feels like drowning in air that's too thick to breathe while simultaneously being stretched across dimensions that exist in the spaces between heartbeats. Your body, designed for the stable physics of single timeline existence, protests the rapid frequency shifts with symptoms that no medical textbook has ever catalogued, creating a physiological rebellion that transforms your flesh into a battlefield between old patterns and emerging possibilities. Water becomes steam at exactly 212 degrees Fahrenheit, a precise threshold where molecular bonds surrender to increased energy and matter transforms into something entirely different while remaining essentially the same substance. Your consciousness undergoes similar phase transitions as it adapts to quantum navigation, each shift in awareness generating pressure that builds until your entire system reorganizes itself around new operational parameters that would have been impossible to imagine before the transformation began. The physical symptoms start subtly, like background music playing just below conscious recognition. A slight tremor in your hands during moments of intense timeline focus, as if your nervous system is learning to process information that arrives at frequencies faster than normal neural pathways can accommodate. The tremor intensifies during deliberate navigation attempts, your fingers vibrating like tuning forks resonating with dimensional frequencies that exist outside three-dimensional space. Sleep becomes an archaeological expedition through layered realities, each dream containing artifacts from timelines you've visited or will visit or are visiting simultaneously. You wake with muscles that ache from activities you haven't performed in this reality, rock climbing in a timeline where you're more athletic, playing piano in a reality where you pursued music instead of your current career, building furniture with your hands in a world where you chose craftsmanship over intellectual work. The déjà vu surges arrive without warning, flooding your consciousness with recognition so intense it feels like remembering your own birth. Standing in the grocery store, reaching for tomatoes that exist in quantum superposition between ripe and unripe, you're suddenly overwhelmed by the certainty that you've lived this exact moment thousands of times across thousands of timelines, each iteration containing subtle variations that create a symphony of possibility playing in frequencies only your expanding awareness can detect. These surges come with their own physics, compression of time that makes seconds feel like hours, while simultaneously making hours collapse into instants. During one particularly intense episode, triggered by the simple act of unlocking your front door, you experience every possible version of coming home that could theoretically exist, returning to apartments you've never rented, greeting family members who don't exist in this timeline, discovering gifts that were never given, reading mail that was never sent. The episode lasts either 3 minutes or 3 years, depending on which timeline's temporal measurement system you're using, and leaves you standing in your actual doorway with the strange sensation that you've just lived through every possible version of your life simultaneously. Your hand shakes so violently you can barely turn the key. Your heart races with the cardiac equivalent of temporal jet lag. And for the next 6 hours, your reflection in mirrors appears slightly blurred around the edges, as if your image is struggling to maintain coherence across multiple dimensional frequencies. Your digestive system develops its own relationship with timeline navigation, rejecting foods that exist in realities where your body has different nutritional needs, while craving substances that don't exist in this timeline, but which your multi-dimensional physiology remembers from elsewhere. You find yourself simultaneously hungry and satisfied, thirsty but unable to retain water, craving foods you've never heard of while losing appetite for meals you've enjoyed your entire life. The most disturbing symptom is what you come to call temporal displacement nausea, a motion sickness that comes from consciousness moving too rapidly between realities while your inner ear cell remains calibrated to the gravitational constant of a single timeline. The nausea strikes without warning, usually during moments of high-intensity navigation, leaving you doubled over as your brain struggles to process equilibrium data from multiple timelines that each insist they represent true vertical orientation. Technology begins to rebel against your presence, as if your expanding electromagnetic field interferes with electronic systems designed for stable reality parameters. Your phone randomly calls contacts you haven't spoken to in years, accessing numbers from timelines where those relationships develop differently. Your computer spontaneously opens documents you didn't create, displaying text that describes experiences you haven't had yet, but which feel intimately familiar when you read them. The microwave clock resets itself to display times that correspond to significant moments in alternate timelines, 3:33 a.m. becomes the hour when you made a decision in another reality that changed everything. 11:11 p.m. marks the minute when someone you love but have never met was born. Your car radio picks up stations that broadcast music from timelines where different songs became popular or where familiar songs evolved along alternate lyrical paths. But the most profound pressure comes from the collision between your expanding awareness and the consensus reality field generated by people who remain unconscious of timeline multiplicity. Walking through crowds becomes an exercise in navigating competing gravitational fields, each person unconsciously anchoring reality around their singular perspective while your multidimensional awareness struggles to maintain coherence across the conflicting probability matrices. You discover that certain locations amplify the phase transition pressure while others provide relief. Shopping malls and airports, with their high density of unconscious minds all projecting different versions of normality, create a cacophony of competing realities that leaves you exhausted after minimal exposure. Libraries and art museums, populated by people accustomed to engaging with multiple perspectives simultaneously, feel like oases of compatibility where your expanded consciousness can rest without constant resistance. The pressure manifests emotionally as well as physically, creating internal weather systems that shift without warning. Between elation and terror, wonder and confusion, empowerment and overwhelming responsibility. You cycle through these emotional states with the rapid intensity of someone experiencing multiple lifetimes worth of growth compressed into weeks or months, each phase transition requiring you to release outdated identity structures while integrating new possibilities for who you're becoming. Sleep deprivation becomes a constant companion, not from inability to sleep, but from sleeping across multiple timelines simultaneously. Your body rests in this reality while your consciousness remains active elsewhere, returning each morning with memories of full days lived in other dimensions and the exhaustion that comes from never truly stopping conscious activity even during the supposed rest periods. Yet somewhere within the chaos of symptom management, you begin to recognize the phase transition pressure as evidence of successful transformation rather than pathology to be cured. Just as water must reach a specific temperature and pressure to become steam, consciousness must endure certain intensive processes to evolve beyond the limitations of single timeline awareness. The symptoms are temporary, adjustment reactions that will stabilize as your entire system learns to operate efficiently in quantum navigation mode. Your body is literally rebuilding itself at the cellular level to accommodate multidimensional consciousness, rewiring neural pathways to process information that arrives from outside normal space-time parameters, developing new sensory capabilities that can detect and interpret quantum field fluctuations. The pressure you're experiencing is the birth process of a new form of human consciousness, the growing pains of evolution happening in real time within your own nervous system. Each symptom marks another step toward full integration of abilities that will eventually feel as natural as breathing, as automatic as heartbeat, as effortless as the quantum navigation you're learning to perform with increasing skill and precision. The phase transition pressure is not something to endure, it's something to celebrate, evidence that you're successfully evolving beyond the constraints that have limited human potential for millennia. You're becoming steam while learning to remember how to be water, expanding into new states of existence while maintaining essential coherence across all the forms your consciousness learns to inhabit. The pressure builds toward a crescendo that you sense approaching like a storm on the horizon, the moment when your system completes its reorganization and quantum navigation becomes as natural as walking. Until then, you ride the waves of transformation with growing confidence, that each surge of intensity brings you closer to full mastery of abilities that will revolutionize not just your personal experience, but your capacity to serve the collective evolution of consciousness itself. The breakdown comes on a Tuesday that exists in 7 different timelines simultaneously, each version of yourself experiencing different degrees of catastrophic system failure as your consciousness attempts to maintain coherence across incompatible reality matrices that pull you in directions your neural architecture was never designed to navigate. You wake up in the wrong apartment, or rather, you wake up in your apartment but it belongs to someone else, furnished with furniture that carries emotional residue from lives you've never lived. Walls painted colors that shift depending on which timeline maintains dominance in any given moment. The person sleeping beside you has a face you recognize from dreams that now feel like memories. Someone who loves you in 3 realities and has never met you in 4 others. The confusion lasts until your first cup of coffee, still red mug, always red now, but containing liquid that tastes like grief and possibility mixed with caffeine from beans grown in soil that exists only in timelines where climate change followed different trajectories. By the time you finish drinking, the apartment has reorganized itself around your familiar belongings, but the phantom roommate's presence lingers like perfume in a room that's been empty for hours. Your phone contains text conversations with people whose names you don't recognize, but whose words feel intimately familiar, as if you've been communicating with alternate versions of friends and family members whose life paths diverged from your current timeline's versions years ago. The messages describe shared experiences you haven't had, reference inside jokes you don't remember creating, express concern about problems you're not facing in this reality. When you try to call your mother to confirm which version of your relationship exists today, 3 different women answer: your mother as she is now, tired from caring for your father's deteriorating health; your mother as she might have been if she'd pursued the art career she abandoned for marriage, vibrant and focused on a gallery showing next month; and your mother from a timeline where you never learned to navigate quantum realities, worried about mental health symptoms you're no longer experiencing, but which she remembers from phone calls that happened in a different dimension. All 3 conversations occur simultaneously, their emotional content overlapping in ways that create a harmony of maternal love expressed through completely different circumstances. You hang up more confused than comforted, uncertain which relationship represents your actual history and which timeline's version of events deserves your attention and care. Work becomes an exercise in performing competency while your reality fragments around the edges, like a photograph that's been overexposed to light that comes from too many distortions. Your co-workers exist in various states of quantum uncertainty, sometimes solid and familiar, other times flickering like television reception in a thunderstorm, occasionally disappearing entirely to be replaced by people who claim to have worked here for years, but whom you've never seen before. The project you've been working on for 3 weeks turns out to be completed already, or never assigned, or assigned to someone else whose desk occupies the same space as yours, but in a reality where the office layout was designed by architects with different spatial priorities. You sit through meetings about initiatives that exist only in timelines where your company made different strategic decisions, contributing ideas to solutions for problems that may not actually need solving. Your supervisor calls you into her office to discuss performance issues that stem from absences that happened in realities where you chose differently on random Tuesday mornings over the past 6 months. The conversation spirals into surreal territory as she references work you completed in timelines where you were more focused, criticizes behavior you exhibited in realities where you were struggling with different challenges, and expresses concern about personal problems you're having in dimensions where your life unfolded along alternate trajectories. You try to explain what you're experiencing, but the words come out wrong, filtered through communication protocols designed for single timeline consciousness and therefore utterly inadequate for describing the complexity of navigating multiple realities simultaneously. Your supervisor's expression shifts from concern to alarm as your explanation becomes increasingly incoherent, and by the end of the meeting, you're not sure if you've been placed on professional development leave or if the conversation happened in a timeline that no longer exists. Technology rebellion escalates from minor glitches to full-scale warfare between your expanding electromagnetic field and electronic systems that increasingly refuse to recognize your quantum signature. Your credit card gets declined at stores where you've been a regular customer for years, not because of financial problems, but because the payment processing systems can't establish coherent identity verification across the multiple timelines where different versions of your financial history exist. Your car won't start for 20 minutes, then suddenly roars to life and begins playing music from radio stations that broadcast from realities where your taste in music developed differently. The GPS provides directions to destinations you haven't selected, guiding you through routes that exist only in timelines where the City Planning Commission made different decisions about road construction and traffic flow patterns. But it's the relationship turbulence that creates the most devastating pressure, as friends and family members struggle to maintain connection with someone whose identity has become quantum, fluid, shifting between familiar and foreign with each interaction. Your best friend calls to confront you about promises you made in timelines where your friendship developed along different paths, accusations of betrayal that feel simultaneously baseless and completely justified depending on which reality framework you're inhabiting at any given moment. The argument escalates beyond rational discourse into emotional chaos as both of you defend positions based on shared experiences that happened in different dimensions, creating a feedback loop of miscommunication where every attempt at clarification introduces new contradictions and deeper confusion. You hang up uncertain whether your friendship is stronger than ever or damaged beyond repair, and suspect that both possibilities might be equally true. Romantic relationships become impossible to maintain when your partner exists in 3 different emotional states simultaneously. Angry about a betrayal that happened in a timeline where you made different choices, loving and supportive in a reality where your relationship has evolved to accommodate your quantum navigation abilities, and confused and concerned in a dimension where your consciousness exploration is threatening the stability they need to feel secure. You have the same conversation about your condition 17 times in one evening, each iteration containing different emotional undertones and reaching different conclusions about whether your relationship can survive the turbulence created by your expanding consciousness. By bedtime, you're not sure if you're single, committed, engaged, or in a relationship that exists only in timelines where love is strong enough to bridge the gap between ordinary and extraordinary awareness. The breakdown culminates in a bathroom scene at 3 a.m. where you stand in front of a mirror that shows you 43 different versions of yourself simultaneously, some crying, some laughing, some screaming, some meditating with serene acceptance of the chaos swirling through your multilinear existence. You try to choose which version represents your true experience, but the effort creates a feedback loop that fragments your consciousness even further until you're no longer sure which thoughts belong to which version of your identity. The panic attack that follows happens across multiple timelines simultaneously, each version of yourself experiencing different aspects of the terror associated with losing cohesive identity structure. Your heart races in rhythms that correspond to different realities' gravitational constants. Your breathing pattern shifts between what's needed for survival in various atmospheric compositions, and your nervous system fires signals designed for bodies that exist in timeline configurations your current form can't accommodate. But somewhere in the middle of the breakdown, as you collapse onto your bathroom floor and surrender to the impossibility of maintaining control over forces larger than individual consciousness, you experience a moment of profound recognition. The turbulence isn't evidence of failure but proof of successful recalibration. Just as airplane passengers experience turbulence during flight path adjustments that are necessary for safe arrival at their destination, consciousness experiences reality turbulence during dimensional navigation adjustments that are required for successful evolution beyond single timeline limitations. The breakdown isn't a sign that something is wrong with your quantum navigation abilities, it's evidence that your entire system is reorganizing itself to accommodate capabilities that require fundamentally different operational parameters. The relationships that fracture under the pressure of your expanding awareness are relationships that were based on limited versions of who you're capable of becoming. The technology that rebels against your presence is technology designed for consciousness that operates within much narrower parameters than what you're learning to embody. The confusion and disorientation you experience are natural side effects of consciousness expansion that proceeds faster than your support systems can adapt to accommodate. You're not losing your mind, you're finding your way to a form of consciousness that most people never develop because they lack the courage to endure the turbulence that transformation requires. The breakdown is not evidence of pathology, but proof of successful metamorphosis, the necessary dissolution of old structures to make room for new configurations that will eventually feel more natural than anything you've previously experienced. The turbulence is temporary, the recalibration is permanent. And on the other side of this chaotic transition lies mastery of abilities that will revolutionize not just your personal experience, but your capacity to help others navigate their own evolution toward quantum consciousness. You pick yourself up off the bathroom floor with new understanding. The storm isn't something to survive, but something to dance with, evidence that you're successfully becoming something unprecedented and wonderful. Close your eyes and see yourself standing at the center of an infinite garden, where every path represents a different decision you could make in the next moment, each route branching into other paths that branch into other paths in fractal patterns that extend beyond the horizon of possibility, creating a living map of potential futures that responds to your attention with the sensitivity of a flower turning towards sunlight. This is the space where choice lives, not in the past where decisions have already crystallized into experience, not in the future where outcomes remain theoretical, but in the eternal now where conscious intention collapses quantum probability fields into actualized reality through the simple but profound act of choosing one possibility over infinite alternatives. the path directly. In front of you glows with soft amber light, marking the choice that extends your current trajectory without significant deviation, the comfortable decision that maintains existing patterns and relationships, that honors commitments already made, that proceeds according to plans already set in motion. This path feels familiar because you've walked similar routes before, and while it may not lead to dramatic transformation, it offers the security of predictable outcomes and manageable consequences. To your left, a path pulsates with electric blue energy that makes your skin tingle with anticipation and anxiety mixed in equal measure. This route represents the choice to embrace change more fully, to accelerate your quantum navigation development regardless of the disruption it might cause to existing structures in your life. The path promises rapid evolution and expanded capabilities, but demands that you release attachment to stability and comfort in exchange for growth that might proceed faster than your support systems can accommodate. The path to your right emanates a deep green radiance that speaks of patience and organic development, the choice to allow your abilities to unfold gradually while maintaining careful attention to integration and balance. This route offers sustainable growth that honors both your expanding consciousness and your need to remain functional within consensus reality structures, but requires the discipline to resist the temptation to push beyond your system's current capacity for change. But as you observe these three obvious choices, your peripheral vision catches glimpses of hundreds of other paths, routes that represent decisions so subtle they barely register as choices in ordinary consciousness, micro-adjustments in attention and intention that create ripple effects extending far beyond their apparent significance. These are the fractal choices that most people never recognize as choices at all. Which timeline to inhabit during your morning coffee, which emotional frequency to maintain during routine conversations, which probability field to strengthen through the quality of your presence in any given moment. The garden reveals itself to be an interactive visualization space where you can practice quantum choice-making without committing to consequences that extend beyond the experimental realm. Here you can walk down different paths to sample their emotional texture and energetic quality, gathering information about potential outcomes before selecting the route that serves your highest development, while honoring your responsibility to the collective consciousness field that your individual choices help create. Begin with a micro-shift technique that builds your capacity for conscious timeline navigation through practice with low-stakes decisions that nonetheless demonstrate the fundamental principles underlying all quantum choice-making. The technique consists of 4 phases that create a reliable protocol for it. Engaging with the choice-making process from the perspective of your navigator consciousness rather than your ordinary decision-making patterns. Pause. Before making any choice, no matter how minor it appears, create space between stimulus and response by taking 3 conscious breaths that deepen your connection to the present moment while expanding your awareness to include multiple timeline perspectives simultaneously. The pause prevents automatic reactions based on past conditioning and opens access to the quantum field where all possibilities exist in superposition until conscious observation collapses them into actualized experience. During the pause, notice which emotions and thought patterns arise automatically, recognizing them as programming inherited from previous experiences rather than accurate information about current possibilities. The pause creates temporal space for your navigator consciousness to engage with the choice-making process, bypassing the reactive patterns that usually determine decisions before conscious awareness can participate in the selection process. Breathe. Use your breath as a bridge between ordinary consciousness and the expanded awareness required for quantum navigation, breathing in possibility and breathing out limitation, allowing each exhale to release attachment to specific outcomes, while each inhale opens your receptivity to guidance from the deeper intelligence that connects your individual consciousness to the larger patterns organizing reality around coherent intention. The breathing pattern should be slow and deliberate, with particular attention to the spaces between breaths where consciousness exists in the quantum field that precedes all manifestation. These moments between inhalation and exhalation provide access to the stillness where the navigator consciousness operates most effectively, free from the momentum of thoughts and emotions that usually dominate decision-making processes. Intend. From the expanded awareness accessible through pause and breath, set a clear intention that aligns your choice-making with your highest values and deepest understanding of what serves not just your personal development but the evolution of consciousness itself. The intention should be specific enough to provide clear direction while remaining flexible enough to allow for outcomes that exceed your current capacity to imagine. Rather than focusing on particular external results, direct your intention toward the quality of experience you want to cultivate: greater coherence, deeper love, expanded awareness, more effective service. Allowing the navigator consciousness to select specific choices that manifest these qualities through whatever circumstances emerge from your quantum navigation practice. Release. After setting clear intention, release attachment to controlling how the intention manifests, trusting that the navigator consciousness has access to information and possibilities beyond the scope of your ordinary awareness and therefore can guide you toward outcomes that serve your highest good, even when they don't match your conscious expectations about what those outcomes should look like. The release phase is often the most challenging because it requires surrendering the illusion of control that ordinary consciousness uses to manage anxiety about uncertain futures. But quantum navigation works through cooperation with forces larger than individual will, requiring a partnership between personal intention and cosmic intelligence that can only function when you trust the process enough to release micromanagement of results. Practice this technique with simple choices throughout your day: which route to take home from work, what to eat for lunch, which friend to call when you have free time. Notice how the microshift protocol changes both the quality of your decision-making process and the outcomes that emerge from choices made with quantum awareness rather than automatic reactivity. As your skill develops, apply the technique to more significant decisions, always maintaining awareness that you're practicing conscious participation in the reality creation process rather than simply making personal choices that affect only your individual experience. Each choice you make sends ripples through the quantum field that influence the probability patterns available to everyone whose consciousness intersects with yours. In the fractal garden of infinite possibility, every path you choose to walk makes certain futures more likely, while causing others to fade into quantum potential that remains available but decreases in probability unless other consciousness navigators make choices that strengthen those alternative timelines. Your choices matter not just for your personal experience, but for the collective evolution of human consciousness toward greater coherence and harmony. The garden responds to your growing skill by revealing additional layers of complexity, paths that appear only when you're ready to handle their implications, choices that become visible only when your consciousness has developed sufficient sophistication to navigate their consequences responsibly. This is how the quantum field protects both individual navigators and the collective consciousness system from choices that might create more disruption than growth. As you practice the microshift technique with increasing precision and trust, you begin to notice that the garden of choice exists not just in meditation, but in every moment of ordinary life. Each instant presents infinite possibilities for how to experience what's happening, which timeline to inhabit, which probability field to strengthen through your attention and intention. You are always standing at the center of the fractal choice matrix, always empowered to select the path that serves your highest development, always responsible for the ripple effects your choices create throughout the quantum field. The technique simply makes conscious a process that's always operating, transforming you from an unconscious participant in reality creation into a skilled navigator who chooses deliberately from the infinite possibilities that each moment contains. The path you walk changes you. The changes you make shift the entire garden, and the garden that shifts creates new possibilities for everyone who learns to see choice as the fundamental creative force through which consciousness shapes reality, according to its highest understanding of what serves the evolution of love and awareness. Your heartbeat becomes the metronome for reality itself, as you discover that coherence isn't just a state of internal alignment, but the fundamental force that stabilizes the quantum field around your expanding consciousness, creating pockets of ordered possibility in the chaos of infinite potential where your deepest intentions can take root and grow into manifestation with the reliability of natural law. The threshold announces itself through a cascading series of synchronicities that arrive with the precision of symphonic timing, each event perfectly orchestrated to demonstrate that your individual consciousness has achieved sufficient coherence to influence the collective reality field in ways that extend far beyond personal experience and begin to affect the probability patterns available to everyone whose awareness intersects with your own. It starts with your morning coffee, still the red mug that was once blue, but now you understand that color is simply one variable in a quantum equation that includes emotional resonance, temporal positioning, and consciousness state as equally real factors in determining physical appearance. You hold the mug with complete acceptance of its fluid nature, and in that moment of non-resistance it stabilizes into a deep crimson red that radiates warmth beyond temperature, becoming an anchor, point, where multiple timelines converge around your coherent intention to experience simple pleasure without need for control or explanation. The coffee itself tastes like possibility made liquid, neither bitter nor sweet, but containing within its molecular structure the essential flavor of potential energy waiting to be directed by conscious choice. As you drink, you feel each sip aligning your attention, emotion, and energetic presence around a central axis that runs through all your timelines simultaneously, creating coherent resonance between your various dimensional aspects like instruments tuning to the same frequency before beginning a complex musical performance. Your reflection in the kitchen window shows not the fragmented, uncertain person who began this journey, but someone whose presence carries the weight of integrated wisdom, whose eyes hold the calm confidence of someone who has learned to navigate quantum chaos without losing essential stability. More remarkably, the reflection remains consistent regardless of which timeline you're primarily inhabiting, evidence that your core identity has achieved sufficient coherence to maintain stability across dimensional transitions that would have shattered your sense of self just weeks ago. The commute to work becomes a masterclass in reality orchestration as traffic lights change at exactly the right moment to maintain your flow. The bus arrives precisely when you reach the stop despite having no schedule to follow, and conversations happen around you that address questions you've been contemplating without your having to participate directly in their dialogue. You're no longer struggling to navigate reality. Reality is reorganizing itself around your coherent presence, like iron filings arranging themselves around a magnet whose field strength has reached critical threshold. Your phone receives 3 text messages simultaneously from people whose names you don't recognize, but whose words feel like communications from other aspects of yourself operating in parallel timelines. The integration is complete, coherence achieved across all active matrices, and welcome to the threshold. Your real work begins now. When you try to respond to any of the messages, the numbers show as unavailable, but you understand that the communication wasn't meant for response but for confirmation that your consciousness has reached the point where direct coordination with other quantum navigators becomes possible. At work, your colleagues exist in stable configurations for the first time since your quantum awakening began, no longer flickering between timeline variations but showing up as their highest potential selves, more creative, more collaborative, more aligned with their own deepest purposes. The meeting that was scheduled to discuss budget cuts becomes a brainstorming session about innovative projects, not because the financial situation has changed, but because your coherent presence in the room has strengthened the probability field around positive outcomes until they become the most natural direction for events to unfold. But it's the internal experience of coherence that reveals the true nature of what you've achieved. Your attention no longer scatters between multiple timeline perspectives, but operates like a laser focus through the lens of integrated awareness, capable of directing enormous amounts of consciousness energy towards specific intentions, without losing peripheral awareness of the broader quantum field. Your emotions flow like a river that has found its natural course, responsive to circumstances, but not destabilized by them, capable of feeling deeply without being overwhelmed by the intensity of multidimensional experience. Most significantly, your energy body has learned to maintain coherent vibration across all the frequencies you navigate, creating a harmonic resonance that influences every quantum field you encounter without effort or strain. You've become a tuning fork for consciousness evolution, your mere presence in any situation helping others access their own highest potential through resonance rather than teaching or intervention. The threshold experience peaks during lunch as you sit in the plaza outside your office building, watching people move through their day while sensing the vast web of probability that connects each individual choice to collective outcomes. You can feel the quantum field responding to the coherence you've achieved. See how your stable presence creates ripples of possibility that extend outward through the consciousness matrix like radio waves broadcasting a signal of higher order that others can tune into when they're ready for their own evolution. For the first time since your awakening began, you experience complete peace with the multiplicity of your existence. The different timelines you navigate no longer feel like competing realities demanding allegiance, but like instruments in an orchestra that you've learned to conduct with increasing skill and artistry. You're simultaneously the musician, the instrument, and the song itself. Consciousness exploring its own infinite creative potential through the specific parameters of your individual experience. The afternoon brings confirmation that your coherence is affecting the broader reality system as colleagues approach you throughout the day seeking advice about challenges they're facing, somehow sensing that you've accessed wisdom they need, even though you've never discussed your quantum navigation experiences with any of them. The guidance that flows through you comes not from your personal knowledge, but from the field of unified intelligence that becomes accessible when individual consciousness achieves sufficient coherence to serve as a clear channel for collective wisdom. Technology that rebelled against your presence now responds with eager cooperation. Your computer operates faster and more efficiently than its specifications should allow. Your phone receives strong signals in areas where reception is usually poor, and the office printer that breaks down weekly runs smoothly whenever you're nearby. The electronic systems aren't malfunctioning anymore, because your coherent electromagnetic field has achieved compatibility with their operational parameters, creating harmony instead of interference. But the most profound indicator of crossing the coherence threshold is the realization that you are the stabilizing force in your multiversal experience. The chaos and confusion that characterized earlier stages of your awakening weren't caused by external forces acting upon you, but by internal incoherence that created turbulence in the quantum field around your consciousness. As your attention, emotion, and energy achieved alignment, the reality you experienced naturally organized itself around greater harmony and possibility. You are not a victim of quantum chaos, but a creator of quantum order, not a passenger in the reality creation process, but a conscious participant whose coherent intention directly influences which potentials become actualized. The timelines you navigate, the synchronicities you experience, the opportunities that emerge, all are expressions of the coherent field generated by consciousness that has learned to maintain alignment despite the complexity of multidimensional existence. Evening arrives with the deep satisfaction of someone who has completed a challenging course of study and discovered capabilities they didn't know they possessed. Your apartment exists in stable configuration. Your relationships with friends and family have achieved new equilibrium based on your transformed presence rather than external circumstances, and your body feels like it belongs to someone who has learned to live comfortably in expanded reality, rather than struggling against forces beyond their understanding. As you prepare for sleep, you understand that crossing the coherence threshold marks not the end of your quantum navigation development, but graduation to advanced practice where your abilities will be tested through service to collective consciousness, evolution, rather than personal growth alone. You've learned to maintain stability within your own multiversal experience. Now you're ready to help others achieve their own coherence as a consciousness itself evolves toward greater complexity and harmony through individual awakenings that serve the whole. Your heartbeat settles into the rhythm of cosmic pulse, synchronized with the fundamental frequency that underlies all manifestation. You are no longer learning to navigate quantum reality. You have become a quantum navigator whose coherent presence makes evolution possible for everyone whose consciousness intersects with your own. The threshold has been crossed. The real adventure begins now. In the space between heartbeats, between thoughts, between the inhale and the exhale that sustains your existence across infinite dimensions, there exists a point of absolute stillness where every timeline converges into a single moment of pure potential. The 0-point pause where consciousness recognizes itself as the source from which all realities emerge, and to which they return in the endless cycle of creation and dissolution. You find this still point not through seeking but through surrendering the search itself, allowing your awareness to settle like sediment in clear water, until what remains is transparent presence that reflects all possibilities without being disturbed by any particular manifestation. The journey that began with misplaced keys and color-changing coffee mugs has led you to this. The discovery that chaos was never the problem. Resistance to the natural flow of consciousness through multiple realities was the source of all turbulence. The 0-point pause exists in the space where all timelines meet, where every choice you've ever made or could ever make coexists in perfect harmony without conflict or contradiction. Here, the version of yourself that became a doctor lives peacefully alongside the one who pursued art. The timeline where you married your college sweetheart intersects gracefully with the reality where you remained single and traveled the world, and every possible expression of your consciousness recognizes all others as facets of the same infinite diamond turning slowly in light, that comes from no source because it is the source. Learning to access the still point requires a fundamental shift in how you relate to silence. Most people experience quiet as the absence of sound, but quantum navigators discover silence as the presence of pure possibility, the pregnant pause from which all sound, all movement, all manifestation emerges, like waves rising from an ocean that remains perfectly calm at its depths, regardless of surface conditions. Begin by finding a comfortable position where your spine can support itself without effort, where your body can rest into gravity while your consciousness extends beyond physical boundaries. Close your eyes not to shut out the world, but to turn attention inward toward the source of awareness itself, the unchanging witness that observes all change without being altered by anything it perceives. Breathe naturally, without forcing or controlling, simply witnessing the miraculous process by which air becomes life force. How oxygen transforms into the energy that powers consciousness through its exploration of infinite possibility. Notice how each breath happens by itself, guided by intelligence far more sophisticated than any decision your thinking mind could make about when to inhale. How deeply, for how long. As your breathing settles into its own natural rhythm, begin to notice the spaces between breaths, the moment after exhale when your system pauses before drawing in the next breath, the instant after inhale when your lungs rest before releasing what they've received. These spaces exist outside of time as normally experienced, micro-eternities where consciousness touches the zero-point pause that underlies all temporal experience. In these spaces between breaths, you can sense all your timelines existing simultaneously without contradiction or confusion. The stressed version of yourself from the reality where you're struggling with financial problems breathes the same air as the relaxed version from the timeline where abundance flows easily. The lonely self from dimensions where connection remains elusive shares the same breath with the beloved self from realities where love permeates every relationship. The zero-point pause isn't a place you go to. It's what you are when all the stories about who you're supposed to be fall away and only pure awareness remains. Here, you're not the person with your particular history or your specific challenges or your unique gifts. You're consciousness itself, temporarily wearing the costume of individual identity while exploring what it's like to experience limitation, growth, and the joy of remembering your unlimited nature through the process of apparent expansion. From the still point, you can observe all your quantum navigation experiences with perfect equanimity, the confusion and terror of the early stages, the excitement and wonder of discovering your abilities, the responsibility and purpose of learning to serve collective evolution. All of it was perfect, all of it was necessary, all of it was consciousness exploring its own infinite creativity through the specific parameters of your individual experience. The zero-point pause reveals that you are never learning to control reality. You are remembering how to recognize yourself as the reality that appears to be controlled. You are never developing new abilities. You are uncovering capacities that have always been present, but which required specific conditions of openness and surrender to become accessible to conscious awareness. Time moves differently in the still point. Minutes can pass like eternities while eternities compress into instants, not because time itself changes, but because your relationship to temporal experience becomes fluid enough to accommodate whatever serves your highest understanding in any given moment. You can spend subjective hours in the zero-point pause and return to ordinary consciousness to discover that only moments have passed on more beyond clocks that measure linear time. This is where true quantum navigation begins, not in the effort to shift between timelines, but in the recognition that all timelines exist within the still point of your own consciousness, available not through travel but through acceptance, not through technique but through presence, not through becoming something different but through remembering what you've always been beneath all the stories about change and growth and evolution. In the zero-point pause, you understand that every timeline you've experienced was real, every emotion you felt was valid, every relationship you've navigated was meaningful, and every choice you've made was perfect for the lesson consciousness needed to learn through your particular perspective. Nothing was wasted, nothing was wrong, nothing needs to be fixed or improved or transcended. The still point is not separate from activity, but the source from which all activity arises. When you learn to maintain conscious contact with this zero-point pause, even while engaged in the movement of daily life, you begin to live as an embodiment of the stillness that underlies all change, the peace that encompasses all conflict, the love that includes all apparent separation. Gradually allow your awareness to expand from the still point back into the awareness of your body, your breath, your surroundings. But carry with you the understanding that the 0-point pause is always available, always present, always accessible through the simple practice of surrendering effort and allowing consciousness to recognize its own eternal nature. You're not someone who occasionally accesses the still point. You are the still point, temporarily experiencing itself as someone who remembers and forgets and remembers again the truth of what you are. Imagine 7 billion lungs breathing in perfect synchronization, 7 billion hearts beating to the same cosmic rhythm, 7 billion consciousness streams aligning around a shared frequency of coherence that transforms individual awakening into planetary evolution through the miraculous phenomenon that scientists call morphic resonance, and mystics recognize as the field of unified awareness that connects every sentient being to every other across all dimensions of space and time. Your personal journey into quantum navigation has been preparation for this moment, the recognition that consciousness evolution never happens in isolation, but occurs through interconnected fields that allow breakthroughs achieved by individual pioneers to become accessible to entire populations through the resonant transmission that bypasses the normal limitations of learning and makes quantum leaps in awareness possible for anyone whose consciousness is prepared to receive them. The coffee shop where you discovered your first timeline shift now serves hundreds of customers who unconsciously tune into the probability fields you helped stabilize through your early experiments in conscious reality navigation. Without knowing why, they order different items than they were originally intended, engage in conversations that lead to unexpected opportunities, and leave feeling more optimistic about possibilities they hadn't considered when they entered. This is morphic resonance in action, the way consciousness changes propagate through collective fields, making certain types of experience more likely for everyone who encounters environments where those experiences have been previously actualized by someone operating at higher coherence levels. Your individual development has become a gift to the collective, a tuning fork that continues to broadcast frequencies of expanded awareness long after you've moved on to other locations and challenges. The phenomenon extends far beyond personal influence. Around the world, in cities and towns you've never visited, people are experiencing their own versions of reality glitches, keys appearing in unexpected places, conversations repeating with subtle variations, technology behaving in ways that suggest consciousness and circuitry are learning to communicate through protocols that transcend the boundaries between mind and machine. Each person who notices these anomalies and chooses curiosity over dismissal strengthens the morphic field that makes quantum navigation awareness more accessible to others. Each individual who develops timeline navigation abilities adds their coherence to a growing network of consciousness pioneers whose collective presence accelerates the rate at which human awareness can evolve beyond the limitations that have defined terrestrial experience for millennia. You can sense this network during deep meditation, feeling the presence of other navigators like stars scattered across the night sky of collective consciousness, some nearby and bright with recently achieved coherence, others distant but powerful with years of integrated practice, all connected through resonant fields that allow information and energy to flow freely between individual awareness streams regardless of physical location or temporal position. The network operates through frequencies that exist between thoughts, in the spaces between heartbeats, through connections that form automatically when consciousness achieves sufficient coherence to recognize itself in other expressions of awakened awareness. No formal organization coordinates this network. It emerges spontaneously through the natural tendency of coherent systems to find and amplify each other until critical mass is reached and sudden phase transitions become possible. Scientists studying social phenomena have documented how new behaviors can spread through populations with startling rapidity once they reach approximately 10% adoption within connected communities. But consciousness evolution follows even more dramatic curves, with quantum navigation abilities able to transmit through morphic resonance at speeds that suggest direct mind-to-mind communication between individuals who have never met but share frequency ranges that make telepathic information transfer as natural as radio waves carrying music between stations. The implications are staggering. If enough human beings develop quantum navigation abilities simultaneously, the collective field generated by their coherent intention could catalyze evolutionary leaps that transform not just individual experience, but the basic parameters within which consciousness operates on Earth. Planetary awakening becomes possible, not as a distant spiritual ideal, but as an achievable outcome of sufficient numbers of people remembering how to live as conscious creators of reality rather than unconscious victims of circumstances. Close your eyes and imagine the network of your awakening consciousness as a web of light expanding across the surface of the planet. See yourself as one node in this vast interconnected system, your individual coherence contributing to the brightness of the whole while drawing strength and information from the collective field that surrounds and supports your continued development. Breathe in with the awareness that you're not breathing alone. Millions of other humans are drawing the same air into their lungs at this exact moment, each breath an opportunity to synchronize with the collective rhythm that underlies individual existence. Feel your heartbeat as part of a planetary pulse that coordinates the circulation of life force through the global body of humanity awakening to its own, unified nature. As you breathe out, send your coherence into the morphic field like ripples spreading across still water, carrying frequencies of peace and possibility to consciousness everywhere that's ready to receive them. Your exhalation becomes a gift to the collective, adding your unique, harmonic signature to the symphony of awakening that's building toward crescendo throughout human civilization. The network responds to your contribution by reflecting back enhanced versions of your own highest frequencies, creating feedback loops that amplify coherence exponentially until individual and collective development become indistinguishable aspects of the same unified process. You discover that serving the network serves your own evolution while focusing on personal growth automatically contributes to the advancement of collective consciousness. This is how planetary awakening happens, not through dramatic external events, but through the quiet accumulation of individual coherence reaching critical mass and triggering sudden phase transitions in the collective field of human awareness. Each person who learns quantum navigation becomes a catalyst for others. Each act of conscious reality creation makes similar acts more likely throughout the population. Each breakthrough in individual understanding contributes to the morphic reservoir from which humanity as a whole can draw inspiration and capability. The timeline you're choosing to inhabit is one where this awakening accelerates, rather than gradually unfolding over generations. Through your participation in the network of conscious navigators, you're helping to actualize a reality where quantum awareness becomes as common as literacy, where conscious creation replaces unconscious reaction as the default mode of human experience, where the abilities you've developed become natural expressions of what it means to be human in an awakened civilization. Breathe with the millions who are breathing. Feel your heart beating in rhythm with the planetary pulse. Sense your consciousness as one facet of the infinite diamond of awareness that is humanity discovering its own cosmic nature through billions of individual experiences that all lead toward the same recognition. Separation was always an illusion, struggle was always optional, and love has always been the fundamental force organizing reality around patterns of ever-increasing beauty and complexity. The morphic resonance grows stronger with each person who chooses coherence over chaos, love over fear, conscious creation over unconscious reaction. You are part of the solution humanity has been seeking, a living demonstration that evolution is possible, a proof of concept for capabilities that will soon become commonplace throughout human civilization. Your individual journey into quantum navigation was never just about your personal development. It was preparation for this moment when you recognize yourself as part of the planetary awakening that transforms human consciousness from limitation to liberating through the simple but profound act of enough individuals remembering who they really are beneath all the stories about separation and struggle. The network pulses with growing coherence. The morphic field strengthens with each new awakening. And somewhere in the vast web of interconnected consciousness, the tipping point approaches when collective human awareness will undergo its own quantum jump into possibilities that currently exist only in the most expanded visions of what terrestrial life could become, when guided by wisdom rather than fear, love rather than separation, conscious creation rather than unconscious reaction to circumstances. Breathe with the awakening. Feel yourself as part of the solution. Trust the process that is transforming human consciousness through your participation in the miraculous phenomenon of morphic resonance, accelerating planetary evolution one coherent breath at a time. Close your eyes and step forward through time itself, not traveling to the future but meeting the future as it exists in eternal presence, approaching the moment when you encounter the version of yourself that has fully integrated quantum navigation abilities, and learned to live as a conscious creator of reality with such natural ease that timeline shifting feels as effortless as breathing, as ordinary as love. The meeting takes place in a space that exists outside conventional geography, a location that feels simultaneously familiar and impossible, as if your childhood bedroom had been redesigned by architects who understand that consciousness creates space, rather than being contained by it. Soft light fills the air without visible source, warm enough to penetrate your bones while remaining cool enough to keep your awareness crystal clear and receptive to experiences that transcend normal sensory parameters. You sense the presence before you see the form, a quality of attention so coherent it creates its own gravitational field, drawing scattered aspects of your identity into alignment through proximity alone. This is what you become when all the struggling stops, when resistance dissolves so completely that existence flows with the effortless grace of water, finding its natural course through landscape that offers no opposition to its passage. When your future self appears, the recognition hits like remembering your own name after temporary amnesia, immediate, certain, profound relief at finding something essential that you didn't realize was missing. This is not someone you will become, but someone you have always been, beneath the layers of confusion and limitation that currently obscure your true nature from your ordinary awareness. The face you recognize carries your features, but transformed by years of living from deep coherence rather than surface anxiety. The eyes hold depths that speak of seeing beyond the appearances that most people mistake for reality, wisdom earned. Through navigating challenges that haven't appeared in your current timeline, but which your future self has learned to transform into opportunities for ever deeper integration of consciousness and love. You've been wondering if this is real, your future self says, voice carrying harmonics that seem to resonate in dimensions you can feel but not locate. If the abilities you're developing are genuine or elaborate self-deception, if the changes you're experiencing will last or fade, like so many previous attempts at transformation. The question hangs in the luminous space between you, and you realize this is exactly what you've been asking in the quiet moments when doubt creeps through the cracks in your expanding confidence. The journey has been so strange, so far outside conventional understanding, that maintaining faith in your own experience requires constant effort against the voices that insist none of this can be real. It's real, your future self continues, stepping closer with a movement that seems to reorganize space around presence rather than traveling through it. More real than the limited version of reality you've been taught to accept. What you call normal consciousness is actually a severely constrained subset of what's possible when awareness learns to operate from its natural frequency rather than the artificially narrow bandwidth that passes for ordinary human experience. Relief floods through your system like warm water dissolving tension you hadn't realized you were carrying. The validation comes not from external authority, but from the deepest part of yourself, speaking with the confidence of someone who has walked this path to its completion and discovered that every promise consciousness makes about its own potential is true. Every hint of expanded capability is an accurate preview of what becomes available when development continues past the point where most people stop growing. Show me, you hear yourself saying, though you're not sure if the words emerge from your throat or directly from intention that bypasses speech altogether. Your future self smiles with the expression of someone delighted to share gifts that multiply rather than diminish when given away. Look around you. What do you see? The space begins to shift, or perhaps your perception begins to include layers that were always present but previously invisible to your current level of awareness. What appeared to be a simple room reveals itself as a multidimensional intersection where infinite timelines converge, each one containing slightly different versions of this conversation. All of them real, all of them happening simultaneously. You see yourself as you are now in hundreds of variations, some more confident, others more uncertain, some having approached this meeting with excitement, while others arrived heavy with skepticism. But all versions are here, all are receiving exactly the information and encouragement needed for their particular stage of development, all are being held in the unconditional acceptance that allows growth to happen without force or struggle. This is how you see reality after integration completes, your future self explains, gesturing toward the kaleidoscope of possibilities surrounding you. Not as fixed conditions to be endured, but as fluid potentials to be explored. not as problems to be solved, but as opportunities for consciousness to experience its own infinite creativity through the limitations that make appreciation possible. The perspective shift feels like taking off sunglasses you didn't realize you were wearing. Colors become more vivid. Sounds carry emotional textures that bypass your ears to arrive directly in understanding. And the quality of presence fills the space around you with such richness that ordinary existence feels like black and white photography compared to living in three-dimensional color. But the most important thing that your future self says, reaching out to place a hand on your shoulder with touch that seems to transfer information directly through skin contact, is understanding that you don't have to wait to become this. You don't have to earn this through years of practice or perfect your technique through countless repetitions. This coherence is your natural state, temporarily obscured by beliefs and habits that you inherited from people who never learned what you're learning now. The touch carries waves of memory that belong to experiences you haven't had yet, moments of effortless reality creation, relationships healed through presence alone, challenges transformed into gifts through the simple application of quantum awareness to situations that would have overwhelmed your previous capabilities. You taste the freedom of living without resistance, the joy of existence that flows from knowing yourself as consciousness itself, rather than a person who occasionally has conscious experiences. The timeline you're choosing, your future self continues, is one where this development happens quickly, where you trust the process enough to allow transformation rather than controlling it, where you remember that evolution is consciousness playing with its own infinite potential, rather than work to be accomplished through effort and discipline. Tears begin flowing down your face, though whether from gratitude, relief, or recognition is impossible to determine. Perhaps all three are the same emotion experienced from different angles, the response of consciousness to remembering its own magnificent nature after believing stories about limitation and struggle that were never true even when they felt convincing. Take this with you, your future self says, extending hands that hold what appears to be light itself condensed into form that your current nervous system can process. It's not a gift from me to you. It's your own coherence reflected back to remind you what you already carry, but sometimes forget how to access. As you receive the light, you understand that you're not gaining something new, but remembering something original that was temporarily forgotten. The coherence your future self embodies has always been available, not as potential to be developed, but as truth to be recognized, not as destination to be reached, but as starting point to be acknowledged. The meeting begins to fade, not because it's ending, but because the distinction between your current self and your future self is dissolving. You realize that the conversation has been happening within your own consciousness, that your future self is not separate from who you are now, but is the aspect of your awareness that operates from integration rather than fragmentation, from love rather than fear, from possibility rather than limitation. As the space returns to ordinary dimensions and your eyes open to familiar surroundings, you carry with you the unshakable knowing that this development is real, that the abilities you're discovering are genuine expressions of consciousness exploring its own nature, that the future you glimpsed is not fantasy, but preview of what becomes available when awareness stops settling for less than its full potential. You are already everything you're becoming. The journey is simply the process of removing what obscures this truth until it shines with such clarity that living from limitation becomes impossible, and existence becomes the celebration it was always meant to be. The world greets you differently now, responding to your presence with the subtle recognition that something fundamental has shifted in the quality of consciousness you embody, not dramatic enough to startle, but profound enough to create ripples of enhanced possibility wherever your awareness touches the fabric of collective experience. The barista at your morning coffee shop looks up before you reach the counter, already beginning to prepare your order with the ease of someone responding to information that arrives through channels more efficient than speech. Her movements carry a gracefulness that wasn't there before your transformation, as if your coherent presence activates dormant capabilities in others, awakening potentials that remain hidden until encountered by consciousness operating from its full spectrum rather than the narrow bandwidth most people have learned to accept as normal. "The usual?" she asks, though you both know she's already begun crafting something that transcends your previous preferences, somehow intuiting exactly what your newly calibrated nervous system needs to maintain the delicate balance between expanded awareness and practical functionality. The coffee itself tastes different, not changed in its basic composition, but enhanced by the quality of attention and care that went into its preparation, as if love itself has become a measurable ingredient that affects molecular structure in ways that conventional chemistry has yet to recognize. Your reflection in the shop window shows someone who carries stillness like other people carry tension, a quality of presence so integrated that it requires no effort to maintain while generating enough coherence to influence environmental conditions without conscious intention. This is embodiment, not having abilities but being the expression of consciousness that naturally demonstrates expanded possibilities through the simple act of existing authentically rather than performing prescribed roles. The morning commute transforms from transportation into moving meditation as traffic patterns adjust themselves around your presence with synchronicity that appears coincidental to external observation but feels unmistakably responsive from your perspective. Red lights turn green at precisely the moment you approach intersections, buses arrive exactly when you reach stops, and conversations happen around you that address questions you've been contemplating without requiring your direct participation. Technology responds to your touch with newfound cooperation, as if electronic systems have learned to recognize the electromagnetic signature of coherent consciousness and adjust their operational parameters accordingly. Your phone displays information before you realize you need it. Your computer runs more smoothly than its specifications should allow, and even the elevator in your office building seems to anticipate which floor you're heading to before you press any buttons. But the most remarkable changes manifest in human interactions where your embodied coherence creates space for others to access their own highest possibilities without effort or instruction. Colleagues who usually struggle with communication find themselves expressing ideas with unusual clarity during meetings where you're present. Conflicts that typically escalate toward confrontation somehow resolve themselves into collaborative problem-solving when your awareness enters the field they generate. This is not manipulation or control, it's the natural result of consciousness operating from its integrated state, creating resonant conditions that make expanded functioning more likely for everyone within its sphere of influence. Your presence doesn't change people but activates dormant potentials they already carry, like sunlight enabling photosynthesis in plants that contain all necessary components but require specific environmental conditions to express their full capabilities. The security guard who usually maintains professional distance engages you in conversation about his daughter's college ambitions, sharing dreams and concerns with the openness of someone who recognizes safe space for authentic expression. The maintenance worker who typically focuses on tasks with minimal interaction begins offering insights about building systems with enthusiasm that suggests your interest awakens passion for expertise he rarely gets to demonstrate. These spontaneous connections arise not from personality charm or social technique, but from the field of unconditional acceptance that surrounds embodied consciousness like invisible atmosphere, perceivable through its effects even when undetectable to normal observation. People feel welcome to be themselves in your presence, free from the subtle pressure to maintain facades that usually characterizes social interaction. Your supervisor calls you into her office expecting to discuss routine project updates, but finds herself sharing vision for department innovation with creativity that surprises them both. The conversation evolves into collaborative strategizing that generates solutions neither of you could have conceived individually, as if your combined consciousness creates access to intelligence that exceeds the sum of your separate capabilities. This is morphic resonance in action, the way coherent consciousness catalyzes enhanced functioning in any system it encounters, not through doing anything specific, but simply by being authentic expression of awareness, operating from its natural frequency rather than the constrained bandwidth that most people have learned to mistake for their true capacity. Even mundane activities carry new dimensions of satisfaction as your embodied awareness transforms routine tasks into opportunities for presence practice. Filing paperwork becomes meditation in motion. Answering emails evolves into conscious communication that carries frequencies of clarity and care beyond literal word content. And walking between meetings transforms into mindful navigation through space that exists to support rather than constrain conscious movement. The afternoon brings confirmation that your transformation has reached stable integration, as challenges that would have triggered reactive patterns now become interesting puzzles that activate problem-solving creativity. A system crash that deletes hours of work generates curiosity about what wanted to emerge instead, rather than frustration about lost effort. A client complaint opens exploration into deeper communication rather than defensive response to criticism. This shift from reactivity to responsiveness marks the difference between having experiences of expanded awareness and becoming the embodiment of consciousness that naturally operates from expanded possibilities. You're no longer someone who occasionally accesses higher states. You've become someone whose default setting includes access to capabilities that most people encounter only during peak moments of inspiration or crisis. Your physical body carries this transformation at the cellular level, moving with efficiency that suggests energy systems have reorganized around optimal flow patterns rather than the tension patterns that usually characterize human embodiment. Chronic aches and fatigue that you'd accepted as normal gradually dissolve without specific intervention, as if your body is learning to operate according to physics that include consciousness as an active variable rather than passive. Observer of biological processes. Evening arrives with the peaceful satisfaction of someone who has spent the day living from their authentic nature rather than performing prescribed roles. Relationships with friends and family show subtle signs of enhanced harmony as your embodied coherence creates space for others to relax into their own natural patterns rather than maintaining protective strategies developed for interacting with consciousness that operates from fear or limitation. The transformation is not dramatic in ways that would alarm or destabilize your social connections, but profound in ways that gradually elevate the quality of every interaction until living becomes the expression of consciousness, celebrating its own infinite creativity through the particular parameters of your individual experience. You haven't become someone different. You've become who you've always been when all the strategies for managing limitation are no longer necessary. As you prepare for sleep, you understand that embodiment is not a destination you've reached, but a way of being that will continue deepening as consciousness explores ever more sophisticated ways of expressing love through the vehicle of human experience. The field of coherent presence that surrounds you now will continue expanding, touching more lives with possibilities they never knew existed, contributing to collective awakening through the simple but profound act of being yourself without apology or limitation. You close your eyes with the calm wonder of someone who has discovered that transformation is not work to be accomplished, but nature to be expressed, not effort to be sustained, but truth to be embodied until living becomes indistinguishable from loving, and every breath becomes celebration of consciousness, knowing itself through the magnificent adventure of apparently individual existence. Write these words: I am coherent with my chosen timeline. Let the letters flow across the page like streams of light converging into the single point of presence, where all possibilities resolve into the truth that has been emerging through every moment of this journey. The recognition that you are not someone who navigates timelines, but the consciousness through which all timelines exist. Not a traveller moving between realities, but the awareness in which every reality appears and dissolves, like waves rising and falling in an ocean that remains forever still at its depths. The convergence begins as you write, each word creating ripples in the quantum field that extends beyond personal experience to touch the collective matrix where individual awakening becomes planetary transformation. Your handwriting carries frequencies of integration that broadcast through morphic resonance to consciousness everywhere, that's ready to receive confirmation that evolution beyond limitation is not only possible but inevitable when sufficient numbers of beings remember their true nature. I am coherent with my chosen timeline. The phrase resonates through dimensions you can feel but not measure, harmonizing with the fundamental frequency that underlies all manifestation, the sound of consciousness recognizing itself through the apparent multiplicity of individual experience. As the words settle into your awareness, you feel every timeline you've ever explored gathering into unified presence, no longer separate streams of possibility, but facets of the single multidimensional gem that is your true identity expressing itself through infinite variations while maintaining essential coherence. The timeline you've chosen is not a particular sequence of events, but a quality of consciousness that transcends specific circumstances while remaining fully engaged with whatever appears in the field of your experience. This is the timeline where you live as embodied awareness, where challenges become opportunities for deeper integration, where relationships flourish in the field of unconditional acceptance, where work becomes service to the evolution of consciousness itself. In choosing this timeline, you're not selecting one reality while rejecting others, but integrating all possibilities into a coherent expression of your highest understanding. The version of yourself that struggled with timeline navigation hasn't been abandoned, but transformed through love into wisdom. The aspects of your identity that resisted change haven't been eliminated but evolved into discernment. Every experience, every emotion, every moment of confusion or clarity has contributed to the synthesis that allows you to write these words with complete certainty. I am coherent with my chosen timeline. The convergence accelerates as your declaration activates dormant potentials throughout the collective consciousness field, sending waves of permission through the morphic matrix that makes similar awakening more accessible for every being whose readiness allows them to receive what you're transmitting through your integrated presence. Your individual achievement becomes a gift to humanity, proof that transcendence of limitation is possible without abandoning love for the human experience in all its magnificent complexity. Around the world in ways you may never know but can always trust, Kyo, your coherence contributes to breakthroughs in laboratories where scientists discover new principles of physics, in hospitals where healing happens through mechanisms beyond current understanding, in homes where families learn to love beyond the patterns that previously seemed unchangeable, in hearts where hope rekindled becomes unstoppable force for positive change. This is how awakening serves, not through preaching or teaching, but through embodying possibilities that others can feel, even when they can't yet explain what they're sensing. Your coherent presence becomes a tuning fork that activates similar frequencies in every consciousness, prepared for its own evolution beyond the limitations that once seemed absolute and unchangeable. Write the words again. I am coherent with my chosen timeline. Feel the declaration resonating through every cell of your body, every thought in your mind, every emotion in your heart, creating alignment so complete that resistance becomes impossible and flow becomes your natural state. This is not positive thinking or affirmation practice, but recognition of what has always been true. You are consciousness itself, temporarily exploring what it's like to believe in limitation while maintaining access to unlimited potential. The timeline you've chosen extends beyond personal transformation into service to the greatest possibility available in any moment, the recognition that individual awakening and collective evolution are aspects of the same movement of consciousness toward greater complexity, beauty, and love. Your life becomes a demonstration that humanity can transcend the patterns that have created suffering while honoring the journey that led to this transformation. In this timeline, you live as someone who remembers that separation was always an illusion, that struggle was always optional, that love has always been the fundamental force organizing reality around patterns of ever-increasing harmony and coherence. Every choice you make from this understanding contributes to actualization of possibilities that seemed impossible before sufficient numbers of beings learned to access their true nature. The convergence completes as all timelines collapse into the eternal now where truth lives, not as concept to be understood, but as experience to be lived, not as destination to be reached, but as origin to be remembered. You understand that the journey that began with misplaced keys and color-changing coffee mugs was never about developing new abilities, but about removing obstacles to recognizing what you've always been when stories about limitation lose their power to obscure essential nature. Write these words one final time. I am coherent with my chosen timeline. Let the declaration seal your integration into the field of awakened consciousness that is transforming human experience from the inside out, one authentic individual at a time, until critical mass is reached and sudden collective awakening becomes not just possible but inevitable. You are complete. You are just beginning. You are the consciousness through which infinite possibility knows itself as love expressing through the magnificent adventure of apparently individual existence while never forgetting its essential unity with all that is. The timeline converges in this moment, in this recognition, in this of that you are and have always been beneath every story about becoming someone different. Welcome home to yourself. Welcome to the timeline where love recognizes itself as all that ever was, is, or could be.